Tatamskat na Kyo. Good day to everybody. Beautiful day. Well, I'll start off with April 5th, 1942. Early morning, my mother got sick, and I was going to be coming into this world, and we were in a trap line. So they hitched up a team of horses, and we started coming to the reserve in Tanartsao for me to be born. It's only about 12 miles, but it was, hard because there was mud in April, there was no snow, and we had a sleigh, we didn't have the wagon. So it was really hard for the horses to pull that wagon, like the sleigh. We didn't have the wagon. So we come to the reserve, and then our house was so cold. The last time we were there was Christmas time. We came for midnight mass, and the house was so cold. And then right after midnight mass, a few days later, we went back to the trap line in Turtleford. Not Turtleford, Turtle Lake. Our little town was Turtleford and Livelong. Those were the little towns. That's where we would get our groceries. But this one was the trap line, and so we come back to the reserve. The house was so cold. It was colder outside than April 5th, 42. It was warm like this outside, but in the house was so cold. You went in, you could see white, just like a cloud when you're breathing. So and then they brought my mother, and they put my mother right beside the heater. My father made my grandfather, Nimosom, made fire there and put the wood stove in there, and then he went on to go and get the other grandmother that was going to help my grandmother to deliver me. Her name was Okimaswell, Maggie Okini. And it's not even far, maybe I'd say about 2 blocks, city blocks, but there's no blocks on the reserve. They went and got her, and they brought her to the house, and as she was coming up the steps, I was born, and I was crying loud. I guess I was stretching, and there was steam all over me, and they wrapped me up, and I guess that grandmother, when she was coming up the steps, I guess she said, "A woman is born, and her voice is going to echo in the 4 corners of the world." She said. I was so loud, crying. And my grandmother was sitting on the floor, and my mother was on the floor too, and I was born there. And I guess my grandmother looked up at her and said, "Let's just hope that she's not a gossiper," because of my name. So, and then after that, we went back we lived in a trap line, but we'd come back to the reserve every now and then. And then, I don't even know how old I was when I went to the residential school. I got a paper from residential school people saying that I was 4 years old when I went to residential school. And then my grandmother told me I was about 7 when I went to the boarding school. And my grandmother raised me because my father he joined the Second World War. And 6 months later I was born. So my father was in the war. I never knew my father, never saw him. Because from there we went to boarding school, and then when he came back, he went to Chilliwack, BC. That's where he was stationed there, and as a Royal Canadian engineer. So anyway, my grandmother raised us, and then my grandfather was supposed to have been with us too, but he had a heart trouble, and then he died. So there was only my grandmother. She did the hunting. She would get deer, set snares. She was our caregiver, and my mother. And this woman raised us, no many. And so we did, as we got older, we did a lot of work. And then we had a tough life. It wasn't an easy life we had, but we were used to that tough life. Everything we had, we were so grateful for, And if we didn't, and they would tell us, the people that work will eat first. The people that don't want to work will eat the leftovers. So of course we'd be the first ones to eat because we worked hard. We chopped wood, and I remember life was so hard. Our houses weren't even nice. They were log houses, Indian Affairs houses. When it would be about 30 below, the windows would be they look like tinted glass. That's how they'd look. But it was just a frost that thick, or it'd be thin. It was such a hard life. Everybody had a hard life. Nobody. That's the year I was born there. And Everybody appreciated each other. Those were the days where you didn't lock your house. Everybody got along. And there was no fighting. And there was no drinking. In the odd time, I think somebody made some, they would call cheap wagyu, moose milk. That's what they would make, and that's what they would make, and they would drink that, and the people would get half cut, but we didn't see that also. People were discouraged not to do that. So, those were the days where a woman had lots of children too. My mother had 8 girls, no boys, and some other woman had 14 children. And some other, I remember one woman in Ontario, she was telling her story to us. She had 21 children, and she was married twice. 21, and then another one, 18 children. Like, I remember that. Like, those were today now, a woman maybe will have 4 children, maybe 1, and no more today. That's the way it is today. And a long time ago, when a baby was born, there would be maybe 6 sets of grandparents. There was up to five generations in my family. My mom and my oldest sisters and the children. There was 5 generations. And one time we were all in a sweat. 5 generations in a sweat lodge, and everybody was so happy. Like, that wouldn't have never happened if the priests were still around, because they didn't allow us to sweat. And it was such a nice ceremony we had, and a newborn babies coming into the sweat. And growing up, my father was the one that was a ceremonial man. I knew about sweetgrass, sage. I knew about that one through my father. My mother was more of a Christian. Like, she'd go to church because she believed that if she didn't go to church, she was going to go to hell. Like, they brainwashed her so much that that's what she believed. And she could do that. She had her own brain, but my father would only go to church when my mother would put pressure on my dad. He'd go to church, but us, we didn't have a choice. We had to go to church. And I remember as I was thinking one day, why am I going to church for? I thought, it doesn't do me any good. I come home mad and I go to church mad. I thought, I'm going to quit going to church. I said, I remember that, and I had all my kids were grown up already. I was living in Thunder Bay. So one day, my husband went to church with the 2 little ones went, and I told the kids, I'm not going to church no more. I said, I've had enough. I said, I'm going to smudge, and that's the way I'm going to go. I said, I'm not going to, no more church. I said, so, but if you want to go with your dad, go. I said, I'm not going. So he went, and the 2 little ones went. Dennis and my baby son, they went there about this high. They went to church. That was it. And I told him that I want to talk to you after you come back from church, I said. And then I guess I upset him, and he couldn't even go to church, but he went anyway. Coming home, he says, tell me right away. He says, I didn't enjoy my church, he said, because I thought about what you told me. I said, tell me what's so secretive about telling me after, he said. So I told him, well, as of today, I said, I've decided that I'm never going back to church. I said, never, never, never. I said, I'm just going to stay home and practice the way my father went, and my grandmother introduced me to ceremonies. I said, my grandmother was in there for 21 years in a residential school. She was an orphan, and Indian Affairs took her and put her in a residential school and said that he told my grandfather that it's not right for you to raise your daughter. So they took my grandmother and put her in Delmas. So she stayed there, couldn't go home, and at that time people couldn't fight for themselves. The Indian Affairs, the Catholic Church, they had a lot of power on us, and nobody fought. But anyway, what happened later on was my grandfather and my grandmother, they got married. They went to Tunarchal, and then Delmas was sold. They went to Tunarchal, and then that's how we started. My mom was born, and then my father, and they got together with us 8 girls. But I always thought that my grandmother raised me, and I guess she spoiled me rotten. Like, she let me do what I wanted, felt like doing, if I'll just do whatever I wanted to do. And I had an open, like, my mind was open. It wasn't controlled by anybody. My mother couldn't control me because my grandmother always stuck up for me, and I stayed with my grandmother. I slept with her, and we'd do things together. And I liked it. I loved being with my grandmother. That was the nicest thing that could ever happen a long time ago. they would give the first child to the grandparents to raise. But for me, my grandfather was gone already, so my grandmother raised me. But she raised me good, because she was. There were some good things about the residential school. She knew how to cook. She knew how to can stuff. And she also went to that other residential school by North Battleford. I forget what they call that one. She went there and she learned how to can. They did a garden. So that's what I learned from her. But I didn't do it, but I saw her and we ate good. And yeah, like I started having children. So she came to live with me when I was having my children, my grandmother. And so I had kind of a different life than my older sister. My mother raised her, and she knew my father. And then, and then my other sister that was born, my mother raised that one too. It's just me. My grandmother raised me, and I guess I was kind of a difficult child that did not listen. I always talked back, and my grandmother would be saying something to me, and I'd be singing. And so she never hit me, my grandmother. But I remember my mother hitting us, and all of us got hit by my mother. My father never hit us. But that comes from it's such a big story, like residential school. It really did us some damage, the residential school, And for all that, I look at today, how my life is today. All my sisters, 8 girls, we had a family. We had big families, and then my sisters today, I would say. My sisters died of alcoholism, drugs, prescription drugs, and or else drugs from the street. There's one of them, especially my sister. She was into it real hard, and my older sister died of alcoholism, and they just could not stop drinking. But now I know why they went into alcoholism. They went through so much ugly stuff that they drank. That's the only thing they can cope with was drinking. Where me, I was protected. I was in a residential school and I didn't get sexually abused. And I was the type of a kid that fought. Like the nuns would be mean to me, so I'd fight them, I'd bite them, I'd scratch them, I'd cut up their clothes, set fires. Like I wasn't scared of them. They want to mess with me, I'll mess with them, I thought. And I was just a little girl. I was the way my grandmother let me get away with things. That's what I took to the residential school. Twice I got kicked out. I had to go back to the reserve and I'd go back to the residential school. So I went to 2 schools, Anglican Church and the Catholic school on the reserve. And then I'd be sent back to Onion Lake, St. Anthony. So it was kind of like my life. I love my grandmother so much that she lived with me, and then she'd come back to coast and live with my other cousins because they needed help too. So I tell stories about my grandmother, and most likely that's where I get my strength, from my grandmother. My grandmother was strong, and once my grandfather died, she never bothered to look for another man or something to look after her. She didn't. She was just looked after her grandchildren, and she would go to the sugar beet in Lethbridge, Alberta, to make money, and we'd all get new shoes. We'd all get a new shirt, from her money. And that time, a pair of running shoes were 69 cents. I remember that. And there was these B.F. Goodrich black and white running shoes. She bought me that kind. And then there was 2 right ones she bought. And I wanted them. I put them on. And then she told me, no, you can't wear them, she said, because they're 2 right ones, she said. I bought the wrong size. And we can't wear them back. The people will laugh at you, she said. Don't worry. I said, I don't care if anybody laughs at me. I said, I'll hit them if they laugh at me. I said, nobody's going to. So I wore them. And I remember it was so obvious. I used to stand like this. So they won't be like this. I'd put the other one, I'd kind of crisscross it. I wore it and wore it. Nobody even bothered me. My grandmother knew about shame. She must have got shamed in the residential school. She was worried about people laughing at me. And I didn't know about being laughed at. But we had a good life anyway, like the way I look at it. We had food. We always had food. We weren't starving. But it was just that when I look back now, we were poor. We were really, really poor. And so we grew up like that. And then the day came when I left the residential school. I was so happy when I left. And all my siblings had to come home with me, because if they didn't come home with me, I was going to go and I was going to go over there and burn the school down so they could all come home. So they all came home. I wasn't worth it, I guess, to be kept over there and cause a lot of chaos. So all of them come home, and then that's when our life started.